Thinking about how we lived 50 years ago? Wondering if independence has been worth the while? Pause. Think about it with intentional thought and consider where we go from here. Stay tuned and hear what Doctors Nicolette Bethel and Chris Curry got to say about who we was, who we is, and if we have progressed or regressed as a sovereign nation.
Something to think about with Dale Happy Knowles. What we think, we become. What we radiate, we attract. What we imagine, we surely can achieve. Let's change the narrative 242.
Welcome to Something to Think About with Dale Happy Knowles. Join our co-sponsors, Dom Dev Enterprises and Page Investments, and our friends of Something to Think About as we ask questions and make suggestions as to what had happened over this 50 years of independence that we have had. We want you to be a part of this and not to be a spectator. We know they're going to have a lot of information put on the table and you might just want to absorb it. But please, please, please challenge these two bright souls that we have on the screen. I don't just mean bright in color because they my complexion. But we're talking about bright brains. You know, now mine would see what behind their name is doctor. Ain't no doctor behind my name because you know I graduated. Thank you, Lottie. But you know, all of that isn't all good because I still could shoot marble. Welcome, Dr. Bethel and Curry. How are y'all doing today?
Good, thank you.
Doing well.
Awesome. Now, y'all, some people that have some resumes that could go from here to Jamaica and come back 3 times, and so I'm not going to go through all of that stuff, but we know that you're both professionals, and you're also professors, assistant professors, as you formerly told me the technical
associate.
title is.
We're both
Associate. I get it wrong again. That's why I said I was graduated. Thank you, Lottie. But anyway, but we know that you all are nation builders, and you know, not many people in this country are real nation builders. You know, we pretend to do a lot of things sometimes, but you all are real, true, authentic people, and that's why I love to bring you all onto the show. So don't get mad if I ask you all to come on another time. You know, but that's the people love you all, and so I like to give you what the people love. Give the people what they love. But more importantly to me, you all are creatives, something that I can identify with, being an engineer and also now doing this show here. And some of the things, you know, we fall into the creative, even though people don't think engineers are creatives, but they are, the technical word for creatives, and spiritual leaders in your own right and like. So tell us anything else that you want to add that might be different between the two of you that you want to share with the public.
Well, I guess for me, don't forget the theater. So
yeah, that's creative. That's the creative.
Paradise,
but okay.
Shakespeare in Paradise Theater in the Bahamas. That's you know, yes. University pays my bills. Yes, university pays my bills, and the theater and writing feed my soul.
Awesome.
Now, on my side, I'm also an ordained evangelist at Highbury Park Church of Christ. So, and so I also have that. I guess, dimension of my work world and spiritual life that I kind of find are merged together. I actually wrote a book with my dad on the history of our church called The History of the Churches of Christ in the Bahamas, self-published, but I consider that to be an important work outside of my academic work per se.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome because, I mean, that still falls into Earl Nightingale's definition of success. You know, he says a progressive realization of a worthwhile goal or ideal. And so, you know, don't mind who published it. You publish it. And so that was your goal, to get it published. And so then, boom, bam, bickety bam. So, yeah. So Abraham Lincoln, you know that fellow who got them long hat on his head and stuff like that? So he is credited as saying the philosophy in the classroom in one generation will be the philosophy of the government in the next. And we know that the majority rule governance movement that peaked with independence Goal was to bring political, economic, and social equality between the lily white oligarchy that controlled the country and the majority black conky Joe labor class that was severely restricted and discriminated against. But in considering that in 1967, when this milestone happened, the majority rule administration had no intention of being independent. Their goal was to be self-internal rule. And that's a significant thing by itself. So we have to ask the question, what changed that mindset and what instruments of independence defined our identity and vision? And so as we do that, want you to give us your perspective on who we was then and who we is now as a people. We'll start with you, Dr. B.
No, start with Dr. C, because he's the historian. What happened in 1967.
Oh my goodness! I will.
And you just finished doing a book on this. So
oh my goodness! Okay, I'll start only by default. But anyways, I was thinking about this, and you, of course, I can't nail it to one thing. I want to say a couple of things.
Okay.
First is there was a wave of decolonization across the region, leading to, of course, Jamaica gaining independence in '62. And part of that was, too, also the failure of federation as a system that was supposed to replace, in a sense, the colonial system. But it didn't work. It was costly. It was poorly thought through. And it led to competition between, for example, Jamaica and Trinidad, with Manley and Eric Williams fighting. So federation failed. Jamaica gained independence. The floodgates were open, led to Trinidad, Barbados following in their footsteps. And so this wave of decolonization, I think, impacted the Bahamas. And don't forget, too, we had many of our brilliant thinkers and founding fathers and mothers who are also learning about, colonialism and the whole decolonial struggle while away in school in England. A.D. Hanna particularly, Lyndon Pindling, certainly even Cecil Wallace Whitfield, who studied law as well abroad. And they come into contact with ideas, people like Kwame Nkrumah, Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya. These were people who were articulating ideas. They would have also probably have come in contact with, no doubt, C.L.R. James, George Padmore, some Pan-Africanists who were influential in England. And they would have influenced their thinking about nationalism, about identity, about politics. There was also the Fabian Society, which was a left-leaning party in England that influenced particularly A.D. Hanna. So coming back home and then seeing Jamaica's success and then the other islands I mentioned was significant. Then the other part about it is there was a big issue in 1966 when AUTEC was established in Andros. And basically what happened was the United Kingdom and the United States government signed an agreement to basically allow for nuclear submarine testing in the tongue of the ocean.
Right.
And so 65, we had Black Tuesday, and there was this political consciousness and awakening. Nona Martin and Virgil Storr referred to it as demystifying Bay Street. It was political theater of its highest order. But people were not saying, let's go for independence. But when you have people making a decision about your destiny and making a decision without your consultation as it relates to nuclear testing in your own backyard, so to speak, that raised the ire of many of these people who were protesting and were also seeing what was happening around the region. And so they started to realize, you know what, this thing about self-governance isn't enough. Yes, we got self-governance in 64, but these dudes are still doing things without consulting us, particularly on an issue of such mammoth proportions, nuclear testing in our waters. So I believe 66 was a moment of consideration. And let me just show you how powerful this is. In 1966, the same year that AUTEC was created and the testing began, Pindling went in front of the United Nations and he said this: as a people, we are without history, without culture, and without national identity. We study British history, British civilization, and even British weather, but about ourselves, we have no past. and under colonialism, no future. That statement was said in the same year that RTEC and all of the machinations that I just described took
Right.
place. It tells me that colonialism increasingly was seen as a specter, a ghostly figure that no one wanted to be associated with anymore. And so that's when they started talking and thinking about independence.
Wow. Wow. I learned one or two things there just now. So that's good. So Madam Professor, you gotta top that now because I gotta learn something.
I don't know if I could top it, but I think what we need to recognize is that, I have encountered students and others who ask the same question and who really believe that independence didn't give us anything. And there's a difference between independence and making a success out of your nation. That's two separate things, right?
Okay.
But independence is being in control of everything, of your environment. So what Chris was talking about with regard to the ocean, we need to think about it in a wider context. So, for example, just recently, literally recently, in the last 5 years, we have regained the ability to monetize our airspace, right? The space
Right.
over the Bahamas. Everybody else in the world, when you fly over that country, somebody got to pay them something. Who was getting paid for flying over the Bahamas? The FAA, the United States of
Right.
America. Who made that decision? The
Yeah.
UK. Because they were in, that's what we did not have control over. Internal self-rule gives you control over all those things that we think are what we need, but we don't have control over our waters. We don't have control over our airspace. We don't have control over trade. We don't have control over international relations. We can't decide who we want to be friends with and who we don't want to be friends with. If we were not independent, the Florida fishermen, the Dominican fishermen, the Cuban fishermen would have unfettered access to our fish. Because Great Britain wasn't protecting that, because Great Britain has its own interests around Great Britain. So they would have been able to fish. We would have had very little control over what is in our own waters, not just from the point of view of strategy, but also from the point of view of what we can do to feed ourselves, right?
Right.
We would not be able to close lobster season to make sure that we would have enough fish. We wouldn't be able to have any of these internal decisions over the waters that are currently considered to be territorial. So there's a lot of things that we take for granted that we don't recognize could not have been possible without independence.
Cool. Man, we could almost end the show right now because I don't feel like I am top of the class now. I don't learn so much on this thing here, but one of the things on that Brother Curry, I was always under this impression that the change in the mindset to go to independence had something to do with internal strife, right? And we can touch on that in a second, and mainly between Sir Cecil and Sir Lyndon, those what have you. But because Sir Lyndon had said right after the election clearly that it was not a part of it. But self-rule, what he was looking for was to add to what was already there, which would have then been to add foreign affairs control and also national security. But they wanted to still be a part of the British system for more, support and commercial reasons where, the people who had the money back then wanted to skip town and they would give them confidence and whatever. All of that kind of stuff and the like. But, what Dr. B has just said here now ties the two. Y'all have me changing my mind now as to what was really happening there, and they might have just capitalized on the people's push and just made it happen at that time versus maybe a later time because it was going to happen in any event. And the other part to it was the nerve gas, if I remember right. Something in school I can remember when everybody was freaking out that you got to go under the desk and all kind of crap to say because they dumping some nerve gas somewhere and we all dead and this and that. And, I only want to eat crayon in school back then, so I didn't know nothing about any of that, right? Cool.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's definitely part of it. That was, testing nuclear subs in our waters and dumping toxic waste in the water. It's just a matter of having the USA and Great Britain having a conversation. The British people didn't live here. We are,
And the other thing that we also have to factor into this is that the British consider us to be the backwater of their British Empire.
right.
Like we weren't important to them. We never, for the 400 plus years that we were a colony of Great Britain, we never produced any major export. We weren't producing sugar. We never produced cotton, only for 20 years. We never had any sustainable export crop. We were a very costly territory because we were an archipelago. You had to have roads and schools and airports, whatever, on all these different islands. So the more they looked at it, they were like, man, let's just let them go.
Right. But we didn't get those things until after independence either.
Yeah, I know. I mean, and we're still challenged developmentally with those things, especially exports on all of the major islands. So no, in fact, they were quite happy to leave things underdeveloped as they saw it.
Yeah, all the Bahamas was useful for the, and I would argue, it just came to me when I was thinking about how I wanted to introduce this. What Chris says is absolutely true. We were the backwater colony, but the question you have to ask is, why did they keep us, right? And they kept us because we are strategically the most important territory in this whole part of the region. Right. It gave the British the ability to control that juncture between the United States, the Spanish Empire, and the French Empire. Right. And that strategic place and what we have now, we are not capitalizing on that strategy because we tend to turn everything inwards and we don't think about the global perspective with regard to the Bahamas. But from what, Chris, you could correct me, 1670 when we were given to the Lords Proprietors.
Yeah, November 1670, that's correct.
Yeah, until 1973, Britain did not get rid of the Bahamas, even though we were a costly and a troublesome territory. They needed us to control their trade, to keep their ability to be making money from the other colonies that they had.
Yeah, so exactly. What it shows is that we were geopolitically important, but economically we were impoverished. Right. And that sort of like accentuates the uniqueness of us in that we are important and yet we're not.
Yeah. Well, my dear brother who was on the show the other day talking about the port in Grand Bahama and the like, and actually more the Hawksbill Creek Agreement. I shouldn't say the port, because the port wasn't the subject. The agreement was or the act, as he corrected me, that it's actually an act, the Hawksbill Creek Act, that we call an agreement. Because what you all just described is what he's been promoting for a decade or two, about two or 3 decades now, having sat in the Port Authority as a developer, executive, etc. To happen with the situation as to where we're situated to be able to capitalize on all those things. And it doesn't seem like nobody wants to bite their teeth into that. But if we look at that then, so it was safe to say we might have been like a fishing village type, laboring type mass community, and now we are this people who put themselves up on top of the cake and sit down in their lounge chair in some instances to say that we have arrived. I don't know if we have arrived or that's just a mirage. But let's focus now on whether independence has been worth the while and have we progressed or regressed as a sovereign nation. And I will try to do this conversation not through the traditional way of just asking you a bunch of questions, but I'm going to throw some names, some places, some events or some things and see what your responses are to those and so forth. And so hopefully that'll be from a place of sobriety in terms of the responses that I get, not me asking you questions that might be not correct. So the first one I want to throw out is because between that era of majority rule mindset and independence actually happening, there was this person who should be considered a hero of the Bahamas to me, that is Sir Randall Fox. And I think we should start with him because to me he was one of the first casualties. Not saying that he didn't deserve it or whatever. I don't know. I wasn't there. I heard all kind of stories for and against. So y'all could tell me better than I know. But he would have been a part of the original majority rule cabinet, and then the next election, a year later, he would have been scratched. What was his impact on our journey in independence? Because sometimes the first act is the one that steers the boat the whole way.
Let me jump in because again, Chris's book is looking at this early nation building period, so he has information, I'm sure, to augment what I know.
That's the one I didn't pick up yet, Chris.
It ain't yet.
It's still fourth.
That's true. Pick up the other one first.
Finished, right? More or less.
Almost. Getting there. This year. Mm-hmm.
So Randall was indeed, a complicated character, but he was one of the first people that I'm aware of to fight for independence. Like, he was very much a proponent of independence from before, I think, while people like A.D. Hanna and the others were in Britain getting their taste, Randall Fox was calling for independence in the Bahamas then, say from the 40s and the 50s, which was, mind-blowing because the independence movement in the British colonies starts in 1945. So to be thinking in that direction that early was pretty revolutionary, and he was revolutionary in his own way.
Right.
I think he was also dangerous to any government that was in power because he was not a follower. He was not a follower. He was very much a leader, and he was also, how do I want to put it? He had also obtained so much respect from the workers, through the labor movement. He was one of the most dangerous things, and we have to ask this question: why do we all know about Burma Road in 1942, but we don't know anything about the general strike in 1958? And it's because the general strike is dangerous to whatever government is in power. It doesn't matter. Burma Road was a strike against the white minority. The general strike was against whoever is in power who is exploiting workers. And all successive governments, it doesn't matter, since majority rule, all successive governments have gone on to exploit the workers. And I believe that Randall Fox, how I won't put this, had to be got out of the way because he would have fought against that tooth and nail.
Yeah, it'd be a casualty. Yeah.
Good, Doctor. If I could interject, Randall Fox was fearless. So he was never afraid of challenging the system or challenging individuals. And I think that's why his book is so appropriately titled Faith That Moved the Mountain, because his fearlessness was rooted in his faith, in his beliefs. And he was such a firebrand speaker. We often talk about Sir Milo Butler as being sort of a great, public speaker, and he was. But Randall Fox was in a category by himself. And he had a way with words, too. He's brilliant as a writer. And the way that he would put ideas together. Just another example. Again, this you mentioned 58 as not really getting the recognition it should, the general strike. 56 also is significant because in 56 you have three major events unfolding in a single year. You have the anti-discriminatory resolution tabled by Eddie and DePuch. You have the first Labor Day parade organized by Randall Fox. And 1 week later, the election in which Fox, along with Pinling and Butler, you have the Magnificent Six, Sammy Isaacs, Clarence Bain, etc., and Cyril Stevenson getting elected on the PLP ticket. 1 week after the first Labor Day parade. That parade, fascinating though, the story is, and it's in his book, he said that 20,000 people were going to march from Windsor Park, Wolf Road, and they were going to march up to Southern Recreation Grounds, but they wanted the governor, Ranfurly, to attend. And Ranfurly was like, "Oh, I'm not going to attend. It's beneath me. Oh, I'm the governor," kind of thing. Well, Randall Fox says, "Well, if you don't come down to us, we're going to come to you, all 20,000 of us."
Right.
And he really meant that. And guess what? He had the support of people who would actually follow him. So I'm just showing that, in a way, he had traction. He resonated with people. And that is what made him so dangerous. And then when it came to the PLP creating a broad base of support among the grassroots, there was a tactical decision that was made that Penling was a better choice because he was more polished, he was more conservative, but most importantly, he was pragmatic.
Right.
And he could bargain, and he could negotiate, and he could compromise if need be, because that's what pragmatists do.
Right.
Randall Fox was uncompromising. He was the opposite of pragmatic. And so that's why, he's in the cabinet for 1 year, 67, Minister of Labor, and he's out 1 year later because he's uncompromising and he's fearless. So he's a casualty because of who he was. That's the best way of describing it.
Okay. So it sounds like he would have, like you say, hit the boat in the back, and sometimes you say you need a swift kick to go in a certain direction, and you start going, and the momentum might carry. So this next one here would have been around before then also, and take the baton, for lack of a better word, and steer it again. And this is Cecil. And I know of his to-dos with education and works and all that kind of stuff. But what I want us to talk about a lot is what people don't talk about. And it is my belief that his greatest impact on our independence walk is that he caused so much fire to be put on independence feet that Penland was steered the boat the way it needed to be steered for most of the tenure, and when he fell apart, in the latter part. But what's your take on his impact on the independent movement?
It's hard for me to talk about that because I find Cecil Wallace Whitfield, Cecil an enigma. And what is enigmatic about him for me is that he was he was very similar to Randall Fox in many ways. He too was uncompromising, and he too was passionate and pig-headed in his own way. If he was convinced about something, he was going to go for it wholeheartedly. And there are a couple of examples that I could offer. One would be Stephen Dillett and Uriah McPhee. Those were two schools that he was inspired to build by examples that were in the United States of America. And if you listen to what he was thinking at the time, they were a great idea. But they were not practical in the Bahamas in 1968, 1970. They are barely practical, or let me put it this way. Once again, they are not practical. There was a period of time where they were, when we had uninterrupted electrical power supply. Right. But when you build a building with no windows and you have to air condition it in 1970, that was not the greatest idea. And I'm sure people told him that. But he was convinced that this was the way to go. So that was one thing. But the other thing for me that I find very puzzling is that he was an ardent and fervent supporter of the PLP and the fight for majority rule. And what I still have trouble getting my head around is how you, as the leader of the Free PLP, can join with the remnants of the United Bahamian Party to create another opposition. Yeah. And that for me is a puzzlement that I think historians have lots of work to do on.
Yeah. I want to build on what Nicolette said. I also see him as an enigma, but I want to just, before I go into that, I should have said this at the very end of talking about Randall Fox. Randall Fox is the person who actually tabled the vote of no confidence in the fall of 1970 that almost led to Pinling's political career being short-circuited much earlier. Barely did he get the majority to continue in the House, because you had the remnants of the UBP joining with those dissident 8. That was a significant group that day. And that day precipitated then what happened at the convention. I think it was 2 months later, in November, when you had Pinling starting the convention with his cut bait speech, for the boat and fishing and all that.
Official cut bait, yeah.
Right. And then at the end of the convention, we had the free at last, thank God Almighty, I'm free at last, from Cecil Wallace Whitfield, who apparently had one speech written and he had cue cards and he just tossed them and decided to ride the wave of whatever. Yeah. But the point is this, it came across, and it still does to me, as not really thought through. And the reason is because he was separating from the ideological place that he had been so involved in the Black Tuesday incident, actually organizing it, so involved as chairman of the PLP in the 60s, so involved with the progressive arm of the PLP in that period. And so what I see is a man who wanted power. And because he couldn't get it, because Pinling had the power and he didn't, he had to cut bait as Pinling had instructed.
Right.
And so he's an opportunist. And he does not, and this, people may say I'm being critical, but so be it. Because the point is, I do not see an ideological difference between Pinling and Cecil Wallace Whitfield. What I see is personal differences between two men, one of whom wanted power but didn't have it, and the other had the power and wasn't ready to diffuse it in any other way that would allow for Cecil Wallace to enjoy some of it.
And I think that Wallace Whitfield was one of the more progressive members of the Progressive Liberal Party. Pinling was probably the most conservative member of the Progressive Liberal Party. He was the one who was the most hesitant about independence. He was the one who said in the interview, no, we're not seeking independence. If they had interviewed Cecil Wallace Whitfield on that same day, he would have said, yes, we want to be independent. And you would interviewed Randall Fox, he would have said yes, but Pinling was more conservative in that way. So that's why he's a puzzlement for me. And yeah, I mean, Chris has said he's an opportunist. I'm not necessarily going to go that far. I'm going to remain puzzled. But it's a mystery. It's a mystery.
Yeah, then it's exacerbated by what we see following. Because they eventually, as you suggested, Nicolette, this is, I'm going to call it a marriage of convenience between the defunct and dysfunctional UBP and the free PLP, the dissident 8 that become the free PLP that by October of 1971 then become the Free National Movement. But there were negotiations that were going on in Jimmy Shepherd's house, in Jeffrey Johnson's home, in other people's homes on Eastern Road and otherwise. People were discussing and they were having these tactical meetings as to how we would move forward. And it's been said that Jeffrey Johnstone, in fact, said, we have to get rid of, disband the old UBP. We just have to drop them and we have to create a new party. And there was Cecil Wallace Whitfield negotiating with the same people that he had so vehemently opposed. So the point is, the old UBP, and you could say, and this may sound oxymoronic or like a juxtaposition, but Johnstone might have been the most progressive of that UBP group, right? Even though they're obviously a conservative group. But in saying that, what we see is a marriage of convenience between a group that have no political clout. They're not recognizable. They're not figures that people would say, okay. And then on the other hand, you have a group that is absolutely toxic and no one wants anymore, but they have money. So the old UBP have the financing, we're all to make something happen. And
the history of governance and, the things that we trust and the history of government and the recognizable names and all that.
And support from outside.
Bring something to the table, but at the same time, people ideologically aren't going to align with them. But if you have a face of a party that is black, let's just be honest, then you have a chance not much of a chance, but you have a better chance with the face of your leader of the party being black, with the financing being and the experience of the party that is already defunct.
Yeah, and so that took a number of years before '92 could happen, right? Because of what you just said. But one of the things that why I had said that Cecil and those put the fire on the pendant, because of their perpetual mindset. Let me use that word, to get what they wanted. That he know that he could not slunk, and that's why he did the first fire chat. At least that's what I was told. You know, and telling Grammy go smoke a pipe and come let little Johnny play, and you come and sit here and let's talk sense. We gotta work hard, kind of thing. And like you say, he was a practical person. And we're not gonna talk about Penn per se like that, because everybody's talking about him, and that's why we wanted to. But at the rate we go on, we won't even get to 75, and the show might be over, because there's plenty of people in there. But you mentioned Jeffrey Johnstone, and I only want to say that I was taught that he would have said, after the good cut up, was that he said to his colleagues in the UBP that, you know, gentlemen, the UBP is dead. We now have to find people who think like us but look like them. And then the FNM was formed. Now, I don't know how true that story is or how they line up with the times is, and we're not going to debate that here, because we need to move on to some of these other ones. But that's something that if you all could doctor up in some other forum and get it be known what has really happened with that. But when we look at the next major person to me would be Carlton Francis, my teacher, right? And particularly his stance with the nationalization of the casino gambling. And there again, Brennan was practical in the sense that there was supposed to be a nationalization of this, but when the powers to be, who had the money and the control and what have you, did what they did, then, as Mr. Hanna said, you know, Mr. Penner was practical. You know, he knew to back off. But it was still allowed, and I think that's what caused Mr. Francis, the Honorable Francis, to stench the way he did, to the point where he actually resigned. What do you have to say about him? And
he's a man of principle. You know, I mean, I think one of the things that we should take away from this, when we ask the question of whether independence was worth it or how successful have we been, I think we should also ask the question of how many of our political leaders in the independence period have been men of principle, people of principle, people of conviction. Like all of the three people that you've mentioned are people who had ideology, they had beliefs, they had to one level or another, a sense of integrity, something, a commitment to something bigger than themselves. And I have seen that shrink within our political class. I don't see that as a regular thing in our political class anymore. And the question is, why? What has happened? Okay. Why were those men so willing and able to take risks? And the men that we have leading us today, and I say men advisedly, so I could include the women, but the vast majority of them have been men, are not willing to take risks and not even willing to think outside the box that they received, which in many ways is still a pre-majority rule box that tailors life to the minority rather than the majority. So, I mean, as far as I can say, Carlton Francis was a man of principle. He was a brilliant man, and he suffered for his principles. And that's something else that maybe we could talk about, is the reality of what victimization was at the time. Like what we call victimization today isn't. It's, you know, political expediency. It's, you know, I hire my supporters. If the government changed, then you get rid of that. That's not victimization. Victimization is turning on your loyal supporters because they have a different perspective from you and they vote against you. That's victimization. Right. And making it so that they can't work. That's victimization.
Yeah, at the eat, as we say today. Yeah. What do you say, Doc?
I think the singular event we're talking about is often referred to as the Night of the Long Knives. This is where I think it was in 1977, and Carlton Francis had absolutely stood on principle. But another person, Edmund Moxie, a
Right. We can get to
backbencher,
him.
also needs to be mentioned in the same lane of thinking about victimization as well, because he became dissatisfied with his own party because the Jumbe village concept that he had dreamed of, and which
Right.
was initially a great idea and was actually working, but it didn't get the funding. It didn't
Right.
get the funding that it needed to continue to sustain itself. And I think he became disenchanted and disappointed
Right.
with his own party. So he was another one of those victims. When you spoke out and spoke against things on a matter of principle and you stood on it, back in the day, there were consequences. There were
Yeah.
consequences, and
So
these men, they lived with it.
Could a Finland administration or could a majority rule administration really afford to be sidetracked based on where we were and where we were going? And that's why I coined the thing in the beginning, say who he was and who he is and how we get there kind of thing. Because I'm seeing all of these things. So London's decisions may not have always lined up right, but in terms of for individuals, but for as a country, there's some arguments that if he didn't stay be stubborn in his light, that we might not have gotten to where we are when he left, right? Kind of thing. So
Again, this is
yeah. I mean,
no,
it's
sorry.
just food for thought. I don't know.
Well, I mean, this is the kind of thing that future historians get to argue over, right? They get to look at. It's not just a matter of telling what happened in the past, but analyzing what happened in the past and asking those kinds of questions. I think that where we have got has come at a cost that is a cost that we feel in two main ways. I'm sure there are others, but I'm going to single out two. One is in our democratic system. Democratically, we have suffered. We had a major democratic victory, and we did it bloodlessly, and that was an amazing thing. But what the pragmaticism of certainly of the late 70s and the 80s destroyed a lot of that democratic activity. And what we have inherited is a shadow of that. We have inherited, or we have created a system where nobody dissents, right? Where you don't have, if you're in, very few people within the governing party are going to speak out against the leader, right?
Right.
Very few people. You're not going to have I don't know what kind of arguments you have around the cabinet table, because the cabinet decision is one
Fine. Yeah.
decision, it's consensus. But the question is, what real chance of debate and dialogue and dissent do we have? And the result of that, if you don't have debate, dialogue, dissent, questioning, is you have subpar decisions being made. The reason why you have democracy and the reason why you have people sitting around a table that they call parliament, which means to talk, is to try and get the best decisions that you can, because people are going to be giving different perspectives and fighting for different different constituencies, literally. And ideally, you should come to a decision that's going to benefit the great, right? But what we have created is a system where it's a fiefdom where one or two people dictate and everybody else goes, yes, that's a great idea. Let's vote for that.
Right. Now we have some questions was put up on the screen, but we need to get back to. But I have a question for you all too. Is that I don't know if you could go beyond the hour, because we're not even halfway through what we need to do. Or I could bring you back next week, and we could continue the second half, right? So it's a choice to think about before the end of the show. But Rosemary Clarice Hannah, she's a historian herself in a big way, and particularly with all these nice pictures that she'll be framing of making me look good. Because that don't always be easy to do. But She asked this question and said, is the history curriculum being amended? And will the subject be made mandatory for all levels from primary school to university?
Well, that's the dream that we all are living and looking forward to, that dream becoming a reality. Currently, as Nicolette and I have talked about this a lot, about education, but currently at the BGCSE level, history is mandatory. Optional, not mandatory. At the BJC level, there's a broader subject called social studies, which is an amalgamation of 3 disciplines: history, geography, and civics. At the primary level, you have social studies. You don't have a single subject in history. So really, you don't get a concentration of strictly historical inquiry until the BGCSE level, and there it's an optional subject. So therein is the rub, the problem.
But will it be Bahamian?
Well, even and then there at the BGCSE level, you have a core Bahamian Caribbean paper, and then you have an optional paper which includes non-Bahamian subjects. So the issue is, does the curriculum need to be changed? Yes. Hasn't been changed since like 1982. Is it being changed? Yes, it is, right as we speak. And a book is coming out to go along with the amended curriculum. Okay. And I have been involved in that to some extent. But the point is, it needs to not just be at the senior level. We need to look at supporting and scaffolding the junior high level and the primary level. What is sad and tragic, Happy, is that we are, rather than scaffolding and adding complexity as you move up the grades, we tend to just repeat the same content over and over again. My daughter says to me, Dad, why is it that I have to learn about the Lucayans again? I learned about them in grade 5 and 6 for GLAD. I learned about them in grade 7 and 8 for BJC. And I had to learn about them again in grade 10 and 11 for BGCSE. So, and this Lucayans, it's important that we study our indigenous history and culture. But surely when you go to each level, you're going to a level of complexity and depth, and you're asking different questions, and the content shifts and changes slightly. So, but that hasn't happened. And what really is suffering is we have very little knowledge of the 20th century political history of our country, which is so important in understanding national identity and who we are. We don't even have a single book out there that covers the last 50 years since independence. Right. So, there's a huge gap in the literature. And if the gap doesn't get filled with more texts and more scholarship, then to change the curriculum becomes difficult. Right. And so you have to have those two kind of going in tandem. Cool.
All right. So that was that one. And I think she had another one. We can come back to that. But the other one would then be A. Loftus Roca, a friend of something to think about, who is on this show. But before I get to Mr. Roca, Charlene Marcia says that the new primary school social studies curriculum was released last year. The textbook and workbook will be released for this school year.
Excellent.
So I guess that's good knowledge to have, and hopefully we have a lot of information, be education. But actually I think we need to be teaching in Bahamian, but we ain't going to go there today. Asking about Mr. Hospitality himself says, damn, you seem steep, well, must be me, in the particular political slant. Give your considered input to advance us. Well, that's not for me, that's for y'all to answer. But that's, you coming back or you staying on beyond today? What we doing? Then we can know where we can put that question, that answer.
Can't come back.
Okay, so we can
I can't really stay on much longer. How long do you want? We're in the Senate.
Maybe 15 minutes.
How many?
No, maybe 15 minutes after.
15 I could do. I could do 15.
Yeah,
okay.
15.
Right, so we could try. After we'll come back to your question in a bit. We want to frame some more of these things before we get to that. So A. Loftus Roca, immigration, impact, Cuba, Haiti, and the rest. It seems like we have this cultural divide in our mind as to how we treat those 3 different things.
Mr. Roca is a fascinating study in self-improvement. You may not know his story, but he came out of course, Ackland's Crooked, Long Key, self-taught essentially. He didn't go off to law school like like Cecil Wallace Whitfield and fiddling at Adiana. But he was able to pass the bar and become an exceptional lawyer and of course, member of parliament as well. Of course, he's most well known for being in charge of immigration. And so, depending on how you look at him, some say he was the most stubborn man you could ever meet because he was so principled he wouldn't budge on anything. But others say that's the very reason that made him so great, was that he was uncompromising on everything. And he had impeccable character as it relates to what he believed in, and he stuck by it. He was also a very humble man, and I know that even to this day, if you want to find him, you'll probably go down to Paradise Island Bridge, the old bridge, and you'll find him playing dominoes there, or by Montague. He's just been a man that has always known his roots and stayed close to them.
Yeah.
So let me just state, I profoundly disagreed with the impact that the 1986 action had. Although in terms of the law, he was spot on. Basically, Roker was a corrective for the non-application of the law, right? For example, there were a number of things, and the impact was supremely detrimental, particularly to the College of the Bahamas at the time, but also to education in general. But what had happened before was that the law was not being followed, right? The law with regard to contracts and work permits and so on was not being followed. I would question the effectiveness of the law as it is written right now. But the point that Roker made was, this is the law as it is written, and I will enforce it. And he did, to the letter. But I think he was an instrument. I think there was no accident that he was put in place at that time by Pindling, and he served a purpose. He served a number of different purposes. He drew the fire away from Pindling and focused it on Roker. He gave Pindling the opportunity to become a savior in terms of reaching compromises with regard to the work permit issues. And he helped to right the boat, as it were, right? So yeah.
Yeah. And I find that integrity that he had was focused in the right direction compared to some people might be stubborn, and because it's what they believe they did, but his own was more focused for national development. At least that's my experience with interfacing with him and walking his walk. Because everybody knew who Roker was, whether it was Roker PR or it was immigration or whatever it was. Everybody knew his plight, who walked over. The Defense Force, the HMBS Flamingo sinking, what impact did that have on our walk?
My view is that was a singular defining moment in our national sovereignty, where we had to defend our territory, our waters, against foreign poachers and encroachment. And it was also a heroic moment because, although tragic, we lost 4 able seamen. But the men who were poaching were brought in, and they were brought before the courts, and justice was meted out or administered. And a lot of that story unfolded after they scrambled ashore to Ragged Island, finally were able to connect and get connected with Nassau, New Providence, get the reinforcements to come down, and basically bring the people to Nassau to trial. And that story is so amazing and Herculean in a way that we really lose that in the narrative, I guess, about the death of the 4, which we have to, of course, do both. But I feel we haven't done a very good job of balancing the tragedy with the triumph. And to me, that is what makes this moment so powerful, is you have tragedy and triumph. The other triumph is how a small nation like the Bahamas is able to use its jurisdictional location and its association with various international bodies, whether it be OAS, UN, Commonwealth, to exact the kind of pressure needed against the foreign entity, Cuba, to gain a kind of, not reparations, but they did get payment for the death of the four. And I forget the actual amount, if it was 250,000 per family.
No,
but it was
400,000.
400,000. Yeah, thank you,
Plus,
right, close to half a million, right?
Yes.
So the point is they're able to, right?
Cuba replaced
So that
as well.
exactly. So that to me is another victory that we need to talk about more.
Okay.
Yeah, what I want to say is that, while one of the things that stands out to me about the 1980s was at the same time as we had certain issues internally, which had long-reaching effects, we also had some incredible actions that were taken diplomatically. The Bahamas was a very important diplomatic player in the Caribbean region at that time. And I think that what Chris is talking about in 1980, that laid the foundation. The Bahamas was not a yes man at that time. One of the things that was really remarkable about that whole thing was not just that we avoided war. Basically, what could have happened was the USA really wanted to push the Bahamas to invite them in to declare war on Cuba, because what Cuba did to the HMBS Flamingo was an act of war. They sank an unarmed, or not unarmed, but we were not enemy combatants. They sank a Bahamian ship in Bahamian waters, right?
Right.
That's an act of war. And one of the ways in which how can I put it? Part of the crisis involved American fighters coming out of Florida to help clear the airspace and to demonstrate that Cuba could not attack the Bahamas with impunity, right? But after that kind of calmed down, the USA wanted the Bahamas to take Cuba to task for attacking and to take it to the international level and to lay the grounds for what I think the United States would have liked to have seen, an American invasion of Cuba, right? And the Bahamas did not do that. The Bahamas refused to do that. The Bahamas instead said, we are friends both with Cuba and with the United States of America. We are brothers with the Cubans. We will have our own negotiations. And that is what happened diplomatically. And then spinning off of that in 1983, a little bit later, when the USA invaded Grenada, there were only two countries in the Caribbean that criticized the United States of America, and the Bahamas was one of them.
Yeah.
So
go ahead. That's interesting, because it would be interesting to see. You mentioned whether the leaders today would take that.
I don't think they would.
Right.
I don't think they would. I mean, I don't see any indication that would be likely to happen.
Yeah.
Again, the Bahamas helped to criticize Great Britain in 1985 over apartheid.
I was just going to say that apartheid was the next one I was going to call, but seeing that you mentioned, you could continue. Yeah.
Yeah, no, diplomatically, again, the Bahamas was, in terms of foreign affairs in the 1980s, the Bahamas took some serious stands that had significance in our region.
The Nassau Accord, if I could, is really important. I just wanted to give a little more context. In the 1980s, the United States and Great Britain refused to aggressively put any kind of economic embargo or sanction against apartheid South Africa. Why? Because they had the largest gold and silver mines in the world.
And diamonds.
Right, gold and diamonds and silver. Right, thank you. And so the point here is it was all economic. And so what happened in the Nassau Accord when you had the Commonwealth heads of government meet, Pinling crafted this anti-apartheid statement in a very aggressive way, and basically was able to influence other world leaders, including the Canadian Prime Minister at the time. I want to say it was Brian Mulroney.
It was Brian Mulroney. Yeah.
Right. And so his influence went beyond just the region. And the fact that the Nassau Accord came out of Pinling-led caucus at a heads of government meeting
of the entire Commonwealth, right?
Right. It was actually at the Cable Beach Hotel at the time, right? So this was a Commonwealth heads of government meeting, and it was led by Pinling. And so it's a powerful statement, an anti-apartheid statement. 1985, and by 1991, apartheid is dismantled, in part because of the pressure put upon South Africa by the global community, but particularly Commonwealth nations
Nations,
led
yeah.
by Pinley.
Yeah, and I was told by people who would have been in those cycles at the time that those discussions were something a movie should be made of, because it was plenty wit in there, and the banter, and to see Sir Lyndon stand up against, and not just him, but others stand up against I think Margaret Thatcher was the person.
Margaret
Who was
Thatcher,
it?
Margaret Thatcher,
And-
the
and-
Iron Lady,
and
as she was
the Iron
referred to.
Lady and
Yeah.
all of that, and they said that was just like a movie. But he outwitted her and got her to actually agree in the end. So that's interesting. Now
To
talking
agree
about
not
that,
to oppose. She didn't agree.
sorry, yeah,
She
yeah.
agreed not to oppose.
Right. Yes. There's big difference, and sometimes we miss that as a country when we seem to like the thing that once you disagree with one item, that you disagree with all items that somebody says versus what have you. But the one that I don't like at all, which I think don't even exist, is something called the whip in Parliament. What impact has that had on our progress or
I have
our aggression?
absolutely, I have absolutely no idea. I don't know. I mean, I know what the whip is technically in Parliament in Westminster, but I don't know enough about.
Okay,
One would
let's-
have to be
let's
a
skip it then
parliamentary
if-
historian
yeah.
to study the decisions and the discussions
Yeah.
and the debates made for me to be able to say what the impact of the whip has been. I don't know if the whip is an extension of the leader. I think the impact of the leader and the way in which we run our political parties and our politics is very leader centric. So I can't comment on the whip at all. I don't know.
But the budget is one of the items that actually is not policy generated in cabinet, it's generated in the House, and so really and truly that should not, nothing should come away from anybody having their free reign of debate on the budget. But we tend to put the whip in place, and so that's a bastardization of the system. But
I think so.
let's miss that one.
Well, no. Let me just say something. I'm not the best person to say it, but I'm just going to channel another one of our fellow historians, Dr. Stephen Arana,
Okay.
who says that the other bastardization of the system is to make the majority of your MPs cabinet ministers, right? Which means that there is no depth and there's no ability within the House, within your own party, to criticize what you do. This is a dampening of democracy as well.
Right. Okay. Cool. All right. So let's move a little bit away. Because, Chris already spoke about Ed Moxie, and I had that down. And I guess we don't have time to talk about. I call him Sir Miles Monroe because that and his innovative leadership philosophies, etc. But that's BTC also. Batelco also is one that we probably won't have time to. So let's talk about this two-party system where we only seem to move from a bunch of independents, and then we formulate the PLP, then we formulate the UBP, and now we got two parties. Is that regressing or retarding or doing anything in our country, or is that causing it to excel?
I don't think we have two parties.
No, the mentality of a two-party system. Not that we have only two
No, I mean, I guess my question. I guess I would challenge that. I'd push back
Okay,
against that.
fair enough.
All right,
Okay.
because we don't have a two-party system. We just have a system in which two parties have been elected. That's a different thing, right? And I think there's a number of things that feed into it. I see hope. The good thing about the Westminster system is it is not made up to be a two-party system. It can accommodate any number of parties, right? And in some countries it actually does. And in some countries, being the minority party that holds the balance of power is the most powerful thing you can be. Let's take Canada, for example. The party that has generally held the balance of power in Canada, less so today, but over time was the Parti Québécois, right? Which is a small, focused minority, but their ability to balance the House created all kinds of things, such as a bilingual Canadian federation and all kinds of things. Provinces that don't have very large French-speaking populations at all have to have everything in two languages, right? And this is to do with the power of that small block. So I think that we could potentially, and Israel is another place where that happens as well, where you have a small block of very strong right-wing Israelis who control the policies of the government. So we don't have that yet. But I see, if we were to understand the Westminster system, I see the proliferation of political parties that exist right now could take us in that direction. I don't know what would be the right direction to go in, but the fact that we have a Westminster system and not the American two-party system is something that I think is worth.
Fair enough. My only comment on that would have been that I was thinking in terms of what the electorate sees. The electorate only sees two parties. In my view.
I'm not even sure about that.
Fair enough. That's
my
fine.
students don't see any. They don't see any difference between red and yellow. My students don't see any. They don't. They see no difference between PLP and FNM.
So
they ain't vote yet, but we can get to
no.
question
These are voting people. They vote.
Go ahead, Chris. Yeah.
Yes. So if I could, so what we have is on a political spectrum, we have two centrist parties in the FNM and the PLP, and largely our politics has been defined by the cult of the personality of the leader, and so personality, leadership style, that merits a lot or weights heavily on decisions as to which party you vote for, and in fact we've seen that really played out in the last 3 election cycles. One leader was absolutely hated, so people wanted him out, and then we saw that again, and so it reinforces the point about the personality of the leader having great weight or magnitude in our electoral system. However, 2 things: if I see a right-wing party emerging, which I think clearly is the case with this coalition of independents, extremely fascist right-wing. Then that is telling us that there's an alternative to the centrist party ideology of both FNM and PLP. But the problem is it's such an embryonic stage. In the last election, I believe COI fielded slightly better than the DNA and other parties, but it was only about 2% or 3%. What is going to happen as they've remained active, taking on and gravitating towards my right-wing positions and posturing, that might evolve into something more significant.
I agree.
And that is what I'm seeing and projecting maybe in the future. The other factor that I would add is we've seen a trend in the last 2 election cycles of much more independent candidates. I think the last election we had more independents than ever before, broke a record. I remember when I covered the 2017 election, Elizabeth States had, I think, 7 or 8 possible persons that you could vote for. It was the most ever, or maybe it was even 9. Right? So what we're seeing is more options. We're seeing more independent candidates presenting themselves, and we're now seeing the embryonic development of a right-wing element to our politics, which we haven't seen before.
Yeah.
Which we haven't seen since the United Bahamian Party.
Well, that is true. That is true. I should have said since independence.
Yeah, and so the electorate is actually changing, and so that the mindset where you started out where what Abraham Lincoln said about the philosophy in the classroom in one generation would be the governance in the next, right? And so we get into that point, but we just haven't. We missed my generation. I don't know about your generation, Nicolette. I know we're in the same generation, but that's just saying it that way. So, looking at that then, as we get to Abou's question here, Rosemary Hannah says the majority of them are both sides on the same fence, yellow and red. Somewhat, not completely. But one of the things I would say on that two-party system scenario is that we just need more of the younger people to come out and vote, because it's those who are the ones who pushing the alternate agenda than what would have been in the last. And Sir Randall and Sir Cecil would have kept Sir Lyndon on his toes. That's the purpose of these second and third parties, to make sure, and so forth. And so McDonald here says that Charlene Marcia, the finding information can be difficult. Excuse is debatable. Bahamian authors have published lots of books. However, copyright issues, funding to print copies and get books online create the barrier in circulation. One may also question whether people would actually take the initiative to read books by authors like Gail Saunders, Sir Henry Taylor, Sir Edian Depew, Sir Randall Fox, Dame Doris Johnson, Dr. Chris Curry. I got to pick up my book first, but anyway, man always on the move. That's my excuse. So, yes, very much so. That is very true, very true. So as we topple down, could you put Mr. Hospitality's statement or questions back up so we could tackle those? And whilst we wait for those to come back up, let's tackle this one that seems to be big, which is the electronic monitoring system. Who is monitoring who? How did that impact everything?
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Fair enough. All
You
right,
know,
so let's go.
there's a lot of stuff out there that people talk a lot about, and I have
Yeah.
nowhere near enough information
Yeah.
to say.
All right, cool. So, from a mental point of view, so Atma is saying here that you focus on which leaders being lacking. Okay, so that comment was made earlier in terms of comparing to the Pinland administration.
I think he's talking to me.
Oh, okay.
I think so too. Sorry, but
I know, Mr. Hospitality. I'm not even going to touch that, Mr. Hospitality. I ain't going there. I will leave it up to let people make up their own minds.
Yeah, but the comparison was to Sir Lyndon's grit and stickability and those of that era.
I mean, Sir Lyndon was one. He was a consummate politician. He was incredible.
Right.
But he was one among many, right?
That's what I'm saying, yeah.
He was a first among equals. What I said about politicians these were people who thought deeply about the country that they wanted to live in, and who wanted to, and they made decisions that were considered to be lunacy at the time, right? Like national insurance. People, if people today were around the adults that I was around when national insurance came in, they would not have any idea how opposed so many people were. Like free education and free healthcare and things that we take for granted. You know, there are downsides to a lot of the decisions that they made, and I don't see any politician making any decision of that magnitude today. I haven't seen politicians making decisions of that magnitude since maybe 1995, right? Or 1996.
Let me frame it a little bit for everybody out there. So Lyndon in the independent Bahamas was the leader for 15 years.
Oh.
Hubert Alexander Ingram and Perry Glaston Christie were the leader, and I treat them as the same because during that period of time, everything functioned almost as the same. The color only changed. There wasn't much. I mean, there's some things significantly changed, but the general trajectory of the country stayed the same. And that was 25 years. Then Hubert Alexander Minnis was 4 years. And now we under the Philip Edward Brave Davis tenure, which I don't tell people I don't get involved in anybody who's sitting because their tenure isn't finished, so I can't compare them compared to somebody else because I don't know what they're going to do in the future. And so when we look at that then, that can tell us that people always say what Pinland did, but when we look at this whole journey of independence, of 50 years, he would have been there for less than half. And so where we are now compared to where we were, in your estimation, people talk about the Abaco bombing, almost bombing, or whatever you can call it, where they wanted to separate and become a country by themselves. What do you think those people are thinking today who stayed in the country? Are they thinking that we are better or worse?
Well, I want to say two things quickly. Number one is, I think as a historian, the legacy of Pinling is getting better as the years go by. And the reason I say that is because he's the only leader that won 5 successive general elections. That goes back to the pre-independence 67 and 68 general elections, and then 72 as well. But the other thing about Pinling was, he had a lot of political challenges. I mentioned the vote of no confidence in 1970, but let's not forget you had the Abaco independence movement, and then you have this new party emerging in the FNM. You had the drug crisis, the 1984 Commission of Inquiry.
The AIDS.
You had the AIDS epidemic, certainly. You had rising cost of living and housing and issues in the 80s and 90s, social ills. There was a lot of challenges. And in 1985, of course, that conclave where you had people fired and resigned because of course, the Commission of Inquiry should not be missed either. So he had so many different battles, people forget. But he lasted 5 terms. 5 terms. So that's pretty impressive. But here's the thing. I believe that we have obviously been flip-flopping for a while, since 1987. And so the weight of history is kind of against the party that's in power, unfortunately. The question is, have we marked our bearing? Have we done enough? Do we have a national development plan? These are things that we need to think about. Right. But I think his legacy, I believe Pinling's legacy looks better now in hindsight than it did when he first left the political scene.
Right.
I think, for me, I think that what happened, what we had to deal with when we came into independence was we had a huge deficit, which we had to address. Right. There was so much neglect for the people that there was a lot of ground to cover. But the ground that we were covering was simply to get our people in our country on par, to par. What we're lacking now is because we got to par. So that is a great achievement. And to being at par now is a far sight different from being so subpar that we were in 1970, right? Let's go with 1970 just for the heck of it. But what we don't have is any vision to get beyond that. And so what has happened is because of that, we're stuck in a rut that just seems to be getting deeper and deeper. And with the result that in the 2010s, for the first time, the Bahamas is like 20 years behind the rest of the Caribbean, maybe 10 years behind the rest of the Caribbean in independence, 20 years behind the rest of the Caribbean in this particular fact. But now we are right there with the rest of the Caribbean as being an emigration nation.
Okay.
Right? New Bahamians, young Bahamians, if they can leave, they are going to leave. And that is something that should tell us something about where we are right now.
Right.
Okay. Because it's relatively recent, I think we can intervene and change it, but it's going to take the people of the caliber that we had running the country 50 years ago. And I'm waiting to see that.
Yeah. The brain drain is a significant issue in our country, and we don't realize it, but we've capped off in our population growth because so many people are leaving our country. And the best and the brightest and the young are the persons that carry on the legacy of your country. We don't have that so much because we have so many people, the best and brightest, leaving.
Yeah, awesome. And that is so accurate, particularly and worse than that is that we lose in our culture because our fertility rate is lower than the threshold to keep your culture. I think it's 1.4 or 5 or something like that. But and we down to the 1.1 or 2. So y'all got to get busy, y'all young people. So the Rosemary Hannah, Clarice Hannah is saying here that it took C.A.P. Smith 6 years to convince the government to introduce national insurance, and no mention was made of him when the building was named in honor of Sir Clifford Darling. Cap was one of those people who was convinced by Penman to come home to help build the country. Well, I could tell you about a couple other people like that too. But yeah. But any comment to that?
I don't have any comment to that. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
we got to watch something to think about with Dale and Happy Notes, because we learn plenty of things, and
That's
including
right.
me.
Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
Yes,
So
yes.
don't forget to like. Hit the like as many times as you want. If you hit it 10,000 times, hit it then. And share. So more of your friends could get to see this information. Hopefully at some day it will reach the schools. Whatever, however you want to do it. So the question of the day now is that what narrative do we need to change? Because I always believe in this show, we always say it over and over and over, everything is start from the narrative, and whatever the narrative is what we're going to do. So what narrative do we need to change to best position our nation for success? How should we be affected, and where do we want and need to be in 50 years from now? And we close with that.
Well, I would just say, we like to think of the Bahamas as a small island state, and we talk about us having small islands. And forgive me because I know we have an.
You know what I was going to say, Chris.
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, but we're first of all, we're the largest Atlantic world archipelago, and if you put all the islands together, the waters together, we're actually bigger than Cuba. So I'm just going to leave it there. But the point is that we have to have a bigger sense we have to have a bigger sense of self, of who we are collectively, and we don't do a good job of pitching just how great we are.
I agree. Obviously, that's what I was going to say too. So that should tell you something. We also need to stop thinking that the solution to all of our ills lies in Nassau. We need to free up the people. We need to invest. We need to, I don't want to say develop, because that's the wrong word. We need to open our other islands. We need to devolve power from the center. We need to give the family islands the opportunity to welcome more people in, because maybe our young people are not leaving the Bahamas as much as they're leaving Nassau. Right. And if they could go to another part of this country and help to build this large country that we have, I think that could be the answer to a lot of our ills and plenty hope.
Right.
Awesome. Well, we'll just close with a statement here from Charlene Marcia, which says that sourcing correct information for the content can be time-consuming and expensive. Difficult is not an excuse, but a reality. I've been in the profession for many years. I own many history books written by Bahamian authors. This was because I make it a point to purchase books. Finding Bahamian books is a task in itself. Check out the majority of our bookstores, and you will notice that they have mostly textbooks. The primary social services curriculum has limited information. I researched. One of the things I would say about that would just be this, is that we spend an enormous amount of money traveling to the United States and around the world, and numbers and stuff like that. So the money is there. People are willing to spend the money. We just need to find a way to change their mindset as to where they spend the money.
I want to say something different. What this tells me is that we really need a national library. A national library is a place in every country where Bahamian authors deposit their books. And then they're there for people to go. One should not have to be going out and buying your own textbooks. We should not be building our own libraries. There should be a library system that has this information available, so that it makes this task of learning about who we are easy and accessible, like pretty well all other democracies on this planet.
And we could start with the schools, because some of these schools don't have functional libraries.
But if you have a national library, then the school's libraries.
No, I'm not knocking what you said. I'm just saying we could also start by, that's closer to the children. Go ahead, Doc. What's up?
I hear about the National Library. We could add to that a National Heroes Park. We could add to that a museum. So we just need to national a few things.
Yes.
But as you can see, the link between all of these concepts is education. So the path we sort of were taking in 1970 or even 68, 69, I guess we got sent on a detour or something. But we need to get back to education being the engine to national development. And I think that's all I've said.
Maybe we need to get back to the national. I think we have placed far too much trust in this concept of development by foreign investment, and it just don't work.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Failed experiment. Let's move on.
Yeah, cool. All right, and so the final thing is I always ask my guests if there's something that we didn't discuss that you want to say to the public, or you have some announcement or whatever.
No, dude, this is we stayed a whole half hour extra.
Good. All right. Well, I just got to ask it, because my mommy would say I was rude if I didn't do my duty.
Give your mommy my love. Tell her hi.
Will do.
Take care,
everybody on social media out there, we hope you enjoyed the show and you found value in it. Do. Hit the like till you're tired of hitting like. Also share it with all your friends. Put it in your status, whatever. I don't know. We'll be back next week with another evocative conversation. Take us away.
Enjoyed the show? Then subscribe to us for more educational and inspirational content. Ring the bell so you never miss a show. Let's change the narrative, 242.